they're leading this mission. They're with their Kurdish counterparts who are lead on the operation, and things start going sideways pretty quickly. ISIS is in these buildings, and they're shooting up the Kurdish commandos who are trying to effect this rescue operation. And Josh and one of his brothers are in this element that's getting hemmed up pretty good, and he sees it going sideways. And it's kind of to Tim Tebow's definition of boldness, right? He sees what needs to be done. He goes all in, and he looks at the other American with him, and he goes, "Hey, on me!" And he basically, leads an assault into this building where they're taking the majority of the fire.
Welcome to episode number 8 of the TMAC Impact Show. Today's episode was really cool. The mission for this podcast is sharing impactful stories to inspire growth. Well, Phil, he got into the Canadian military at 17 years old, and then, long story short, got into the American military, became an officer, and then an Army Ranger and a Green Beret, and involved with other special operations organizations, and learned a ton of leadership skills in there to do what he is now doing for work, which runs Stonewater Training. They teach people leadership and leadership skills and how to find and define their purpose and lead themselves well, and all sorts of other things. So we'll talk about some military stuff, some marriage and family stuff, and leadership in general. It's a really cool podcast today. I am grateful that I had the opportunity to even have Phil on the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment on this video. And if you're listening to it on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever else it is, leave a 5-star review. I want to make the world a better place with this podcast and encourage and inspire them. And the best way to get out there is by leaving a review, and it pushes out there to more people. So you're helping me accomplish the mission of this podcast when you do that. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did having the conversation. One thing we're going to talk about quite a bit today here is leadership. And we'll talk about, how you can even talk about it, what qualifies you to do that. And before we get into all of that stuff, I want to know, Phil, how is it that you define the word leadership? Because there's all kinds of definitions out there. I'd love to know how you and your company, Stonewater, define it.
So I think, to your point, there's multiple definitions of leadership, right? And I grew up on the Army definition, which was providing purpose, vision, direction to get a job done to a group of people. And I paraphrase heavily, or purpose, direction, and motivation. Sorry. I kind of took it a level further, or actually simplified it more for Stonewater. And to me, leadership is anytime you're leveraging influence to achieve an impact. So it's independent of your position, it's independent of your role, your experience. It's if you are doing something intentionally or otherwise, good or bad, and it's influencing others and having an impact on their actions, then you're leading them. And I think that I like that definition because it applies to all of us all the time. Everything we do, to our friends, to our family, to our coworkers, to people who are direct reports, people who we report to, clients, customers, peers, competitors, whatever. Our actions and our words resonate well past what we assume their effective range to be.
I really like that. The part that sticks out for me, because a very simple definition of leadership that I hear all the time is that leadership is influence. And that's correct. But if you leave it there, then it doesn't really get to the next part that you defined it, is that to achieve an impact. And for me, when you said that, it hits a little bit deeper on, if I am influencing other people, something is going to happen, and I need to make sure that I'm leveraging that for good, as opposed to the latter. So I really like how you added on to that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, good leadership is your purpose is noble and righteous, right? And your impact resonates. And, directed, focused, intentional leadership is you're impacting people a certain way for a higher cause and higher purpose. And that's, to the end state of my organization, Stonewater, that's what we're going for. We want, purpose-driven, value-based leaders to be leading authentically, effectively, and just just crushing it, not for dollar signs, not for widgets sold. I mean, that might be their business, but we're like, no, we want to change lives. Now your vehicle might be selling widgets to change those lives, and that's okay. That's good and right. Um, but the end state is the changing lives, not the P&L at the end of the year, which makes us not a great company for some people. If the bottom line is your sole metric of success, then I'm like, man, I'm glad you have that clarity. I'm probably not the ideal person to work with. Yeah, maybe you should edit that out. That might not be a great marketing plan. Like, hey, if dollars and cents are important to you, Stonewater shouldn't be your first go-to. I'm like, wait a second, no, I take that back. Like, we want people to succeed and do well, but not at the expense of the human factor and a higher purpose. So
Exactly. Yeah. I think that if all you're living for is the money at some point or another, you're going to end up empty. And so when you can come to that higher purpose and all the other success comes and you can plug those two together, I think that's where people can really thrive in life and make an impact on other people.
absolutely.
So with your Stonewater company, you do these expeditions and they're outdoor expeditions. You just finished one up. Can you tell me a little bit about what that whole adventure was like and the people that were involved with it?
Yeah, so we had a number of leaders from around the country come together. Some were entrepreneurs, some were established business owners, some folks that are actually in the leadership field, and then I had even some Marine Special Operator senior leaders come out for that program. And it was themed on adaptable leadership, meaning you have your firm foundation, you've got your purpose, your values, your disciplined practices to be a leader of excellence, and to carry an organization forward, and you have your plan, and then life happens. Like, I'm here, I want to go there, I want to take the team there, and then you know inject whatever. And so we really wanted to practice that muscle of having good clarity and a good foundation of where we're at and what we stand for and why we're here, and then striving for an end state, but then somewhere along the way there's a wrinkle. And how do we adapt and still accomplish our higher level goal, even though the plan is now no longer viable or less viable? So we did that using the streets of Portland. We did that using Mount Hood and the powder and the snow up there, and then we did that on the rivers around you know this area. So the Willamette River specifically, a little bit of the Clackamas, and just kind of getting people in different environments and get them out of their comfort zone and let them practice leading each other. There's also a combination. There's an academic piece to it, and there's even like a 6-week workup for it. So people are really nailing down as leaders. Hey, what do I stand for? What do I see my purpose? What's my role? Who are leaders that had an impact on me? How can what can I take from their example? We also had them do some emotional intelligence testing to get just a firm read on, hey, what are my natural go-to strengths? Where are some areas that I have to be aware of? And how does that impact how I lead? And it was super cool. So they show up to the program armed with a pretty heavy level of self-reflection and self-awareness. There's also a physical prep component for it because we do a physical piece. We don't want people to miss out on the leadership lessons because they're too fatigued doing a physical event. So we try to get them to a certain level of preparation. And this group, they were all fitter than me. So I was the one person who was like, whew, needing to take a breather. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it was really good. And it's really neat to see them walk away with their leadership skills are honed, right? They're already established leaders, but they're leaving a little sharper, and they're going back to their organizations with a way to build, strengthen, and teach their team. It was really exciting. I was actually
Hmm.
and I do a debrief after the event individually with people. I give them a week or two to
Okay.
process, and then we'll share kind of lessons. And yeah, I was talking to one. He's one of the Marine Special Operations folks. He's on the East Coast, and he was saying how he was taking several aspects of what we did and turning that into some of their training with their Marine leaders. They have some of the more kind of the mid-level leadership of his organization, and it was really neat. I mean, it was just super cool to see an idea grow and morph and evolve, and it's going to achieve that impact that was way beyond what I had planned. um,
Hmm.
Yeah, so they kind of work on their leadership. They have something to take back to their team. I really love to see the connections that they build among each other, and even some of the Oregon-based attendees are like, "Hey, we need to get together. Like, we can't let this slip away. Like, when are we meeting up? What are we
Yeah.
doing? We need to connect." And I love that because that's fostering that, they're brothers and sisters now from their shared experience. And lastly, they've just got a really neat, sticky, memorable experience that has a bunch of much deeper lessons and learnings to carry forward. So that was our program 2 weeks ago. We got another one coming up at the end of May that is just going to be totally rad. I love the vendors I'm working with, and it's all kind of whitewater based in sort of more South Central Oregon, and it's just really amazing. It's all
Yeah.
about, hey, how do you lead yourself, and then how do I effectively lead a team? And you don't have to worry about
Mhm.
adaptability because the river is going to take care of all that for you. And it's such a great analogy for you are all in this powerful stream of life. There's a lot out there you don't control, but you control your choices and your actions. So we're going to spend a day working on our individual leadership and working on kayaks. So there'll be and no experience required, right? But it's all on you. Like, hey, how well can you learn and apply the lessons and do what you were taught? And how do you learn and adjust to that? And then the next day is all in the raft. So now it's like, hey, how do we communicate and synchronize and align together to accomplish goals? And of course, I give them messed up goals that make it tricky and hard, and drive them a bit, which is great. And at night, we gather around the fire and go, all right, what was that all about, and what did we learn? It's so cool, Taylor.
That's awesome. Are you guys like camping out, or are you at hotel blocks, or what's that look like?
Yeah, so let's see. The last program, they were staying at this kind of boutique hotel in downtown Portland that had a ton of history and was actually part of our program. That's where we were doing a lot of the academic and discussion parts, both before and after. Um, this next program, and it's always shrouded in ambiguity, so I don't want to give too much away for in case anyone comes out to it who's listening. Um,
Yeah, we don't need to go
yeah,
into it
the
if you don't
original
want.
plan. All right. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's all and that's what I love. Part of the whole thing is people show up without a ton of
Yeah.
awareness, and it's kind of about letting go. Like, we stress so much. Like, if I told people what we were doing hour by hour, day by day, they would build up this anxiety and stress. And instead, I like to keep it deliberately ambiguous. And they come out and they do all these things, and at the end I sort of show them, like, just this is what you did. And they're like, holy cow. It's like, yeah, you went through, a pretty rough area of the city without a phone, without a map. You figured it out. You did all these hard things alone at night. You led each other navigate with map and compass all over the side of Mount Hood. And, you worked through some pretty challenging problems out there. You built this fire. You cooked dinner with flint and steel, something none of you have ever done. You trekked back in the darkness under a headlamp. You recovered these points from the water at night. Like, it's crazy. And they go, holy cow, we did do all that. And it's like, yeah, if I had told you that before, no one would have signed up. So that's part of the ambiguity is
Yeah.
just
Yep.
learning to let go. And I mean, you're faith based, so you get it. Like, God has a plan, right? Like, we can stress and worry about it,
Yep.
but that only hurts us. Or we can just be like, hey, this is how I'm going to prepare. This is where I think I'm called, and my job is just to put my head down and execute to the best of my ability. So we try to emulate that,
Mhm.
and that's one of three pillars that Stonewater does. Is just the execution piece. We have two other lines of business that are significantly different.
And it's funny that you say that if people knew what was expected of them, that they probably wouldn't want to show up, because a lot of times we can't. I mean, we underestimate what we're truly capable of. And like mentioning faith, like something that I love is so many people, they'll sit there and pray and God will just tell me, but ultimately we're called to live out the will of God, not figure it out. Otherwise we could just wait and he would, eat this for breakfast, turn here. But then I don't think we would ever grow or be
Yeah.
challenged. So I think yeah, cool that you do that.
With respect to the faith aspect, it's like there's a rule book out there, right? Like, we have the guidelines. It's not like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's right. No, we know it. It's just really hard to execute, especially under stress and pressure and when the environment changes. So we let ambiguity stress us out. That what to do isn't hard. It's actually doing it under different circumstances and pressures when it's hard. That's where it becomes a challenge. So
Hmm. Definitely. And I doubt you, when you came out of the womb, that you were this phenomenal leader. And so I want to know, Phil, how was it? Like, where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like into growing into somebody who is qualified to not only create, but also forge leaders into their full potential?
sure. So full disclosure, I'd say I am not an exceptional leader by any stretch of the imagination. I love the example, and this is like an ancient Greek philosopher. Seneca said it. He goes, "Hey, I don't have it all figured out." He's like, and I'm paraphrasing because I never actually met him because we're talking.
Yeah.
Oh, he wasn't Greek; he was Roman. Sorry. But
Okay.
he's writing to one of his proteges, and he goes, "Hey, just so you know, this isn't like doctor-patient relationship." He's like, "You're a patient in the bed over here. I'm a patient in the bed over here. I'm just sharing with you what I figured out, what I learned, and I'm right along there with you. We're both trying to figure this life out and navigate through it." So I have been blessed to have some pretty unique leaders in my life, but my journey and kind of where my passion to not just lead but also help develop leaders of impact and with purpose started kind of as a teenager. So I was a high school dropout, and I was kind of going nowhere pretty fast, and I sort of stumbled into the Canadian Army literally on my 17th birthday. I'm like, I don't know, go see what this is all about. And there I just
Mhm.
had leaders who were like, all right, buddy, you signed up for this. Like, this is what you do. And they would not let me slack. They would not let me back off. They held me accountable. They held me to a standard. They showed me the way, and then they put a boot in me and made me do the way. And I succeeded. I was good at doing what needed to be done. And started realizing the potential in myself. I love that. So then, largely because of better commercials, I ended up coming out of the U.S. military. I was a dual citizen, so that wasn't hard to do. But I joined the U.S. Army. I was 19, and I'm like, this is great. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I've got this being enlisted in the Army figured out. And down the road, fast forward about 3 years, I had some leaders that were like, "Hey, man, you've got more potential. Like, you're good at this Army stuff. You should look into being an officer." And when I saw the pay difference between officer and enlisted, I'm like, hell yeah, I should totally be an officer. Didn't even really know what it entailed, but I
Yeah.
applied for a program called Green to Gold, and I went through officer training, and I got a degree, and I came back in as a young officer. And
Hmm.
keep in mind, I was a high school dropout, so for me to get a college degree and become an officer was a pretty big deal for where I started. And it was largely because the
Yeah.
leaders said they saw potential in me and were like lit a fire. So then now I was leading and learning how to lead in real time. And the September 11th happened. We started deploying, started going to war. I led in the infantry, and then I led in Ranger Regiment, kind of one of the tiers of special operations. Then I led as a Green Beret, and I led in some other organizations after that in the special operations community. So I was leading and figuring stuff out. I had some great leaders to model after, and I had some not so great leaders to kind of avoid those pitfalls. And there's a lot of trial and error. And I'll tell you, Taylor, you probably know this, but like I probably learned a lot more from my failures than I did from my successes. Your successes, you pat yourself on the back. You're like, man, I'm awesome, and you flush all the lessons down the road. At least I did. My failures, I'm like, ooh,
Hmm.
that stung. Like that really hurt. How do I make sure I never do that again? So towards the end of my tenure in the military, I went from operationally leading to taking over, kind of how we recruited, how we selected, how we trained some of our special operators. Folks who came from the Green Berets or Rangers like me, SEALs, whatever. And how do we figure out the ones that will do best in this pretty unique organization? And I had a great team. I will take zero credit for the success of that whole process, but I got to see them in action and kind of step back a bit and go, how does this work as good as it works? And a lot of it was pick people with the right attributes, make sure they have a basic leadership framework, they have a few reps under their belt, and then teach them how to operate in ambiguity, throw problems at them, let them fail, let them learn, let them grow. And so I went from there to my final job in the military, and probably ironically one of my most rewarding ones, was teaching our ROTC cadets out at Montana State University, because they were just like they were they were they were hungry, they were open, they were ready to learn. They're the unique part of their life where they're just total sponges, and it's really cool to follow some of them now longitudinally. Some of them are in their mid to late 20s. They're mid-level leaders in the military, and they're just rocking it way better than I was. And there's a huge amount of pride of that when they reach out and goes, "Hey, I did this thing kind of like you talked about, and here's how I sorted this problem out. And I thought of this time you shared this with me." And I'm like, "Dude, that's awesome," And the first husband and wife couple to both get through Ranger School, and the wife beat the husband through. By the way, there are two people I was able to mentor and teach from Montana State. They're in
Yeah.
Hawaii now. They're like this super power couple, like just off the charts, awesome, and that's super rewarding. So that's kind of my leadership journey. I retired, and that's when I started getting into the outdoors, trying to combine outdoors and leadership. Nothing at all new there. I just kind of
Mhm.
made my own brand of it, and it's been going really well.
That's really cool. And I think I heard you say we're having to adapt forward because yeah, the last time we did this and today we're having technical difficulties. Did you say you came to the American military because they had better commercials?
Oh, they were awesome commercials. There's like people doing a wheel and a motorcycle off the back of a helicopter, and then going through a jungle swamp in night vision. And the Canadian Army, there's like four of us, and it's like, wow, those are really good commercials, eh? Oh yeah, we should do that. They have guns and everything. And I mean, I'm slightly facetious. There was more than four people in the Canadian Army, just not a lot more than four.
Yeah, that's really funny. Okay. And so they had better commercials. So you come down here to America and then they had better pay as an officer. Is that when you started to get involved as in special operations?
Yeah, when I was enlisted, so I was an infantryman, and as a what's called an NCO, non-commissioned officer, kind of think lower level management. I was like the team leader at McDonald's, basically, but in the Army version. And yeah, learning some leadership there. But then when I became an officer, I was first an officer in a regular infantry unit, and then I transitioned into Second Ranger Battalion. I tried out, and I was selected for that. They must have been short people or something that day. And then I went, from there, I ended up becoming a Special Forces officer or a Green Beret. And then, like I said,
Mhm.
kept going down different organizations like that.
Yep. Okay. Very cool. So this is something that I've wanted to ask you. So one, have you heard of it's a podcast that's been out for a little more than a year, I think. It's called The Sean Ryan Show. He was SEAL Team 2 and then involved in the CIA. Have you heard of that podcast at all?
Not off the top of my head, because
Okay.
it's not as good
No
as your
worries. Well, there
podcast.
I hope I can be as good as him. I really like it though because so he'll have a lot of special operators on and they talk about all kinds of things and I mean they're 3 to 7 hours long and it's been really interesting
Wow.
from a few that I've listened to. They will talk about, I mean, some of them that are out now talking about their different worldviews or faith journeys. And there's one in particular I'm going to send you after this. His name's Eddie Penny. He was on SEAL Team 6 DevGru, and I cried probably like 10 to 15 times listening to that whole story. And then there's people who are kind of the opposite of that. And so I was really curious as I was prepping for this podcast and thinking about all that. What part did your faith play in your life, in not only you individually but also pouring into other people during your time in the military?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's some really unique observations and manifestations of faith, in the military and specifically in combat. I deployed, 12 times, which is
Hmm.
probably a middling amount for the organizations I was with. There's guys who probably are, 25, probably close to 30 deployments. So I don't want to pretend the sale and end all. But I had a faith background from growing up. My dad was a pastor, so I was exposed to it early on, and then like most preachers' kids, I had to rebel as wildly and destructively as I could. So that fast forward to me leaving home at
Yeah.
16 to figure it all out because I was smarter than everyone else. And then there was kind of a nascent faith in the back of my head. Like, so I'd go jump out of planes or something. I'd be like, all right, God, in case this doesn't work out, like, we're cool, right? We're good. I'm still a Christian. I've got that stamp on me. So there's a
Yeah.
little bit of that kind of the fire insurance faith. But I think for me, when I really made a leap forward, like I always recognized it as important. I never found myself going like, I'm in awe of just kind of the beauty and the power we see in the environment around us. When I'm in the mountains, when I'm in the deserts, when I'm looking, up at the stars at night in the middle of nowhere, I'm sorry, there's got to be a God. This triggers something inside of me that I could never fully step away from my faith. I think things
Mm.
start codifying. For me, it was actually deployment in probably 2008, 2000, yeah, it's 2008 is in Iraq, and yeah, we're talking about different beliefs and faiths. Obviously, religion and culture played a major part in a lot of the wars from 9/11 on. You could probably argue
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the wars, period, but 9/11 specifically on different religions and different interpretations of those religions play a significant part of the conflict. And we were talking about that, and there was a colonel who was there. I was a special forces A team commander, and he was reading Mere Christianity, or he had it on his bookshelf. I'm like, oh, I haven't read this, but I've heard about it.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, you can have my copy, man, if you want. So I just started going through Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and he really just breaks it down like super simply. Like first, he's like, is there a God? Yes or no? Like here's why I think there is, and he never goes absolutely like this is the way, and yet you have to believe it. And if you don't, I'm going to beat you on the head till you believe. He just goes, here's why I believe there's a God, and here's why I believe there's one God. And here's why I believe that God is probably the Judeo-Christian God in my interpretation. And he kind of leaves it out. He goes, this is just my observation. And he kind of walks you all the way to, and here's why, like, I believe in Christianity. And here's what I think it means to be a Christian, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or evangelical or, whatever. He's like, I think these are the core beliefs based on my understanding. It's pretty simple stuff. And I love it. And that sort of, woke me up to where I'm like, yeah, this speaks to me and got me back into sort of building my faith journey from that point forward. And it was, like any faith journey, filled with a lot of stand up, fall down, step forward, run backward, get back up again, and thanks some pretty amazing brothers and sisters who were around that really, really, A, held me accountable, and B, a lot of them led by example. Perfect? No. But were they warriors? Yeah. And it was awesome. I mean, it pushed me and brought my game forward.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, because I was curious about that because I've had so many conversations with people and especially in like the military community, and they just want to shut God off because religion is bad, and they just it's a disservice, unfortunately, which I think the enemy uses to turn people away from the relationship that they could have with Christ. So it's cool to hear that it was somebody and that gave you a book, and then he just kind of builds that argument rather than beating you over the head with it.
Yeah. I think people can really confuse what it means to be a Christian with the behaviors we see in Christians day to day, right? Because that's the downside is Christians are people, which means we're broken and flawed and say silly things and do silly things, at a weapons grade level over and over. It's one of the things about being a
Hmm.
flawed creation, or flawed individuals. So it's trying to get people to go, well, no, no one's perfect, including Christians, and you've got a whole spectrum of really good people and just people who are jackalopes, who wear a certain label, and trying to educate folks is that that's an individual. That's not necessarily what a walk of faith and in pursuing God necessarily looks like. I tell you, it's interesting. I've been able to work with kind of almost every special operations organization around the world, and I don't know the statistics, but I'll just tell you anecdotally, at the highest, most extreme level, the people who have done the hardest things and performed under some of the most stressful circumstances, some of whom you hear about and some of whom you never will hear about. um, faith plays a disproportionate role in kind of in those folks. It's pretty cool.
I I love that you say that because I can't remember if it was the one I listened to with like Eddie Penny or maybe DJ Shipley, but they were one of them said on the podcast that during their time in the teams that there was some guys, you know, the divorce rate is super high and a lot of them are drinking a lot and, you know, being a bunch of heathens, but the guys who always had it together were more than likely a Christian. But so I thought that was really cool when he said it, and so to hear you say that is pretty cool too. And with doing it right, being a Christian comes humility. And so I just wanted to say something that I really appreciate about you is that well, actually last time before we filmed this, that morning I was listening to a podcast with Ed Milet and Tim Tebow. And Tim Tebow, he was talking about boldness and what boldness is. And he said he defined it as to put it all on the line to do what is necessary. And you've done that because you're a Silver Star recipient, which is extremely honorable. And what I think is also really cool is how much you honor other people and the others that you've served alongside. Because the mission for my podcast is sharing impactful stories to inspire growth. Because I believe when I see and hear of what other people have been through, the things that they've done, the people that they've helped, I get excited to go out and do that in whatever capacity that I can. And so I've seen you share and honor stories of people like Jay Blessing, Wyatt Goldsmith, Pat Tillman. And so I know you have a lot of humility and want to share other people, but I wanted to ask what's for two leadership examples, and you can pick which one you go first, but could you share a leadership example of somebody putting it all on the line to do what is necessary, of one example of yourself and then one example of another person as well?
Other person is pretty easy. Thinking of one for myself is actually a little that's tricky, honestly. That's not self-deprecation or false humility. It's just yeah, I'll keep thinking on that one, but I'll give you another example I think is pretty powerful. So a good
Yeah.
friend of mine, Josh Wheeler, we were both in Second Ranger Battalion together, and he was definitely he was a wild one, but just so good and so passionate. He ended up serving in a classified special operations organization that I was also part of, and he was actually I think he's the first American service member killed fighting ISIS, and they were on a prison rescue raid in northern Iraq, and and I just want to be fully clear, I was not on this same mission. Okay, we were part of the same organization, but
Hmm.
I had been part of that particular group, and then I was in a different role in the organization at the time. So I'm not trying to play
Yep.
like I was there, but lots of close friends, and
Yep.
frankly, my old team on the ground there was there, so fairly confident in this. But they're leading this mission there with their Kurdish counterparts who are lead on the operation, and things start going sideways pretty quickly. ISIS is in these buildings, and they're shooting up the Kurdish commandos who are trying to effect this rescue operation. And Josh and one of his brothers are in this element that's getting hemmed up pretty good, and he sees it going sideways. And it's kind of to Tim Tebow's definition of boldness, right? He sees what needs to be done. He goes all in, and he looks at the other American with him, and he goes, "Hey, on me." And he basically, you know, leads an assault into this building where they're taking the majority of the fire from. And this fire's already injured several Kurdish commandos. Josh leads his way in. As soon as he breaks the breach, the door, he's shot at close range, and his story ends very soon after that. He's taken out. His brother who goes with him neutralizes the threat in that room. There's multiple threats. He neutralizes that, and the mission kind of takes a bit of a turn at that point. It goes from really challenging and rough in that sector to they start to turn the tides, all because Josh's action, which is completely selfless, and he steps up and leads. He was for that organization, which is composed of all pretty senior army military folks, is more than just army. He was a mid-level leader for that organization, but he stepped up. He saw something needed to be done. He took initiative. He did it. He paid for it with his life. They end up saving 70 prisoners who were set to be executed, I think, within 24 hours of that operation.
Wow.
Same mission where Pat Payne, you can Google him as well, earns a Medal of Honor. Pat's another guy, mad respect for, and I worked with, and he's a whole other story. But I always like to call out Josh Wheeler's story because, um, Pat's story lives on. Josh's story stopped that night, other than his legacy. So if I can carry his legacy forward, then go to it. But
Hmm.
that was a leader. He had a lot of wise sayings, stuff like if you were on a treadmill and he'd walk up behind you and go, "Hey stud, you can't flex cardio," and then he'd go work out and do curls for an hour. I mean, he's just an animal, super super good guy. He may or may not have shot a deer on a golf course from his back porch with a crossbow before. Um, you know, I don't think he's going to get in trouble for that one. He shared some pretty interesting stories like that. When the time came, like he stepped up and got it done. For myself,
Yeah.
I mean, I can share some good stories of what not to do as a leader. I don't know if I can tell you one. I can tell you where I stepped up in the wrong way, and I learned some lessons from that. Uh,
Yeah.
which, like I said, I learned a lot more from when I made mistakes and had wins. So I was
Hmm.
um, I was leading an organization. We were basically doing a rehearsal for um, a real. We were doing a rehearsal is in the U.S., but it was for a real mission. It was a pretty high stakes mission, and I was the element leader for, as what's called the ground force commander. And we were training. We had run through it several times. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of moving parts. I won't go into the details of it, but on our last run is like, all right, we got this in the bag. Like, this is easy. I was bored. And I was frankly looking for some action, which was not my job. As the leader, my job is to make sure everyone else is doing their job and, stay on the radios, coordinate the assets. Like, just, it's not sexy, but it's important. And it really pays off when things go wrong. But then coming up to our last mission, I looked
Hmm.
at, my comms guy and I'm like, Juicy, we're going to get our gun on it in this one. And what I meant was, we're going to do some shooting. We're going to have some fun. And I meant me and him specifically because we were typically just the guys sitting back there coordinating stuff. Um, and so I stepped out of my leadership role to just be another gun on the ground. And the mission started rolling down, and things went sideways in a big way. And I was the problem. I was not, I wasn't where I should have been. I didn't have the awareness I should have had, and I was the cause of a major problem on the ground. Totally dorked the mission up, completely on me. And it was one of those where you're like, oh my God. And I was slow to take ownership of it. I was like, you're sitting there as a leader going, is this really happening? Am I really screwing this up really badly right now? And the answer is yes. And the one or two people who know it are looking at you like, dog, what are you doing right now? And you're like, I don't know. Can we just forget this? But we can't because it's royally jacked up. It's for a real world mission. And I remember stumbling through the debrief after that, and we were all trying to process what happened. And we had to actually do another one after the fact. But it was when I was leading, when I stepped out of that selfless leadership role and decided selfishly to get a piece of the action, the wheels flew off the bus and,
Hmm.
compromised the mission, compromised my integrity. And it wasn't until I fully owned it that I bought some credibility back to that organization. And there was consequences for that. But so you asked me for a
Hmm.
good leadership story. I gave you my worst leadership story. That'll learn you to ask me any questions, Taylor.
Fair enough. Well, I like that because I think of myself even here a few days where I didn't go to the military, and the where I learned leadership the most was when I was riding snowmobile in the backcountry, and I'm a baby faced 19, 20-year old kid from South Dakota, and I would bring people into the backcountry and have there's I mean, I've had people with broken bones. I've been on search and rescue missions, and times where you can't see, from me to 4 feet away, and we're in a whiteout snowstorm 10 miles from the trail. Um, and I can look back and think of a few times where we get into some situations that we maybe shouldn't be in. And it's because, yeah, okay, Taylor, if my writing ability is here, your clients might not be there. Don't drag them into that. Right. And then I beat myself up at the end of the day. And, at the end of the day, a lot of people always have fun, but like things get bad or could have went a lot worse when I start thinking about, oh, how is Taylor gonna have fun, right? And I relate to that when you said that's what you wanted to do is go get your gun on.
Yeah.
So, kind of transitioning a little bit on the military is you were in the army, but you also have an entire army at home because you have 7 kids, is that right?
Of eight.
So there's 10 in there's 10 in your family. And so what were some of the things that you would do? And I have a friend who's kind of been coaching me on some podcast stuff as I'm learning how to, be a better listener, which my wife loves, and I'm trying to learn how to do that. But um, I get to be the number one person and get to hear it first. So may be asking also selfishly, what were some of the things that you were doing while you were overseas or traveling a lot to not only lead yourself well where you were on mission, but also leading a successful family? How that I mean, that can't be easy. And I know the divorce rates, especially in the special operations community, is high. And you and your wife are together and have a family. And so I really wanted to ask you that as well.
Yeah, so I think I could probably take about 1% of the credit for that. I have a like the toughest, grittiest human I know is Tana, my wife. And she is a no quit soldier like no other. So um, when we were apart, she ran stuff. I mean, there was times, there's a while there where I was probably gone average of I'd say 8 months a year for year after year after year. And so she ran a tight ship, was totally involved. On my end, we made a pretty intentional effort of, if the situation permitted, to connect, I'd say daily or near daily. Now there was times where there'd be a whole deployment where that wasn't an option because of where we were, what we were doing, or it just wasn't available. At first, I think first 6 weeks of the Iraq invasion, there was zero. We just didn't have that opportunity. We were on the move the whole time.
Hmm.
As in the Rangers, and so, but when I could, just being deliberate about it, and working on that listening, like you said, like call and talk, but just shut up and listen, which is something I am still working on. 20 years into my marriage, and probably have a long way to go to improve. I would do stuff like, I remember the first deployments. I didn't know how long I'd be gone, so I got a bunch of cards for my wife: anniversary, birthday, dating anniversary, Valentine's Day, and kind of had someone giving them to her on those dates, pre-filled out notes. And it was something where I'm like, I don't know if I'll be able to call or send an email, so I want to make sure someone could. Those were in the early days. Things got a lot better, probably after, I'd say, oh, oh 04, as far as the ability to communicate. So after that, it was, yeah, just trying to stay connected when you could. I'd send my kids letters, I'd send my wife letters in addition to the, a call or an email, or if we were able to Skype or Zoom or whatever. It wasn't Zoom back then. I think it was like Skype or some other platform. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's little things like that. I thought the letters are cool because I still, every now and again, I'll still see one that I wrote to her back in, like 2006 or something, and it's just neat to see how nice I was at writing then. And I'm like, man, I need to be that guy again. That guy was really funny. That guy's really compassionate and caring.
Yeah, that's funny. I heard a story one time of as I think I was listening to it with Kendra. You may have heard it about the guy who, like on Thanksgiving, he went and bought a little journal and started taking notes every day of why he was grateful for his wife, and he was sharing that on social media. And so then you're listening to that, and they look at you like that it's like, whoa, that guy's setting the standard really high.
Yeah, that's a tough one to beat. Now, my wife, I remember, she had me pretty much lock, stock, and barrel. I went to Ranger School, which is, I don't know, 3 months long, and she wrote me a letter every single day, and sent me care packages
Wow.
when we could get them, which was like between the transitioning from one phase to another. And yeah, pretty much after that,
Hmm.
like letters every day, gave me food when I was super hungry. Like it was a done deal. Like you are as good as they get. So
That's really cool. And now that, so now what year did you retire?
I retired in 2019.
19. Okay. So now that you've retired, how has it transitioned, leading a family well and a marriage well, versus when you were deployed? What does that applicably look like these days now that you're out of the military?
Oh my God, 1,000 times harder. Like, send me to Syria, fight ISIS with like a sharp stick, no problem. Uh, remote, remote school, 7 kids through COVID, like, no thanks. That is so, so hard. It is, I tell you, leading gets closer. The closer in you get to yourself, the harder leadership is. Meaning, when you lead an organization, a big organization, you have all the rank, power, position. It's easy. People do what you say because you wield authority over them formally, right? John Maxwell said it's
Hmm.
level one leadership, your position.
Yep.
When you're trying to lead kids, especially teenagers, especially teenage girls, like, good luck with that as a dad. That is tough, man. Now you're trying to leverage influence to achieve a positive impact, but it's hard because they know you, warts and all. So it is so much more important, but it's challenging, and the stakes are higher. So it's been good. It's been really good to be present. Like, I made a pretty deliberate decision to leave the community I was in and to be present for my family. It was, I could have definitely stayed on for probably about another 10 years, and part of me would have loved that. But I felt I need to be present. When I look at how do
Mm.
I get ambushed on planes sometime. Hey, how do I lead? Give me some leadership hacks. You're some leadership guy, right? And I'm like, okay, typically this is more than a 2-minute conversation, but since you've given me 2 minutes, here's 3 things. If you do these three, whatever you're leading in, you will do well. And number one is to be present, like, actually show up, right? Be there. And that's not just physically present, but be listening, be aware, be fully present. Number two is listen. They go, well, listen, like, I want to be able to talk and write good. Like, that's what good leaders do. I go, no, that's what good leaders do. The best leaders know how to listen. They listen left, right, up, down, and they actively listen and they ask good questions. So if you're there and you listen, you're on your track to being a rock star leader. Anyone can talk, but it's listening that's gold. And then third is like, look the part. And I say look the part because you're not always going to feel the part. So how do I model the way for my kids? How do I model the behavior I want to see in my partner? It's like, that's tough, and I don't feel like it probably about half the time. But don't confuse your thoughts and emotions with who you want to be. Like, that's who you are in the moment. That's you responding and reacting to stimulus. You get a vote into going, who is the man, the father, the husband that I'm called to be, and what would that person do right here? And it doesn't matter what you feel like. You have a choice to actually make that action, and it's really tough because you're like, yeah, but I'm ticked off, or I'm really bummed about this, or I'm really upset, or we're out of coffee. Like, come on. And it's like, hold on. I can choose to be the father that I'm called to be right now. What would that guy do? Um, we did a really interesting drill today. You talk about leading at home, and actually, my wife and I both did this. And we go, hey, if we live our best life, who do we want to come to our funeral, and how do they want them to describe it? So I'm like, well, I want my partner there. I want my kids there. I want my friends. I want my faith community. You start saying all these people, and, well, how do you want them to describe you? And, oh, they'd be like this. They'd be like, Phil was so loving and so supportive, and he was fun to be around, and he pushed me, but he supported me. Whatever we want, however we want to be described when our time is up, when our story is done. And I look at that, I go, okay, that's dead Phil talking to live Phil, because it's pretty high likelihood we're not going to come out of this life alive. So I go,
Yep.
this is me at the end of the road talking to me now. I go, hey Phil, come on, man. We're writing your funeral speech today. Like, I need you to be on your A game. Like, what would that Phil do in this situation when your kids, are throwing axes at each other in the house? Above all, like, he wouldn't just lose his mind. He would turn this into a lesson. Like, how do you do that? So.
Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but when this topic is where I was just taking the most notes, and you kind of answered one of the questions. You talked about being present and listening. And before that, I wrote down leading by example, because I was like, man, I've learned that I can tell my wife and talk at her and nothing happens except for I'm not in a good spot. But when I'm leading by example, it's amazing how much I've seen how much she like soaks up and then will ask me questions later. It's like, man, if I want, it's been learning lesson and challenging to, live to the full potential that I have and not slack on myself. So it's cool that that's how you summed that all up, was look the part.
Yep. Be present, listen, look the part. If you do those three, whether it's at home, whether it's for yourself, whether it's, for Google, like whatever your arena is, you do those three, you're probably automatically a top 50% leader, probably about a top 10% leader if you can do that consistently.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, a lot of people want to talk about it, but when it comes to moving forward and actually doing it, that's what separates the wheat from the chaff. So as we wrap up here, we actually met was in a men's group at church, and a big part of that was leadership. And I think the first book that we talked about, maybe it was the 5 levels of leadership or the spiritual disciplines. I think is the 5 levels of leadership. Anyways, there's a limiting belief of I can't be a leader or I could never be a leader, and I believe that people grow into the conversations that we create around them. So if there's people who are listening, or that I know or the people listening know, that are speaking that over themselves that they can't be a leader, one, stop telling yourself that. Two, what things can we encourage someone with who can't, well, not can't, but says that they can't be a leader for the positive? What would you tell those people?
Yeah, I would tell them they're straight up lying to themselves, and they should, to your point, stop, because that's not true. It's either ignorance or it's dishonesty. Either way, um, I really don't like the word can't or never. I think these are really limiting language, whether it's to ourselves or others. And
Yep.
I built literally a business around going, leadership is a skill and it can be honed. Wherever you're at, if you're like, I couldn't lead my way out of a wet paper bag with a chainsaw, or you're leading some coalition of the willing or whatever it is, like great or small, it's a skill. We can always get better. The ice is never cold enough. So if someone was telling themselves, I can't lead. First off, I'd say it's false, because we're all leading ourselves, up, down, good or bad. The hardest place to lead is here. Um, and then I'd say, if they can literally do the three things we talked about, if they can show up and they can listen, which anyone can do unless you're deaf, and then you're probably a good lip reader, because I'm partially deaf. And if you show up and you listen and you can just model the way, just do what you want your team to do, you're leading. I've been led by people who have said almost nothing. I've got one son, he's really, really reserved. Um, he has like iron discipline, and he teaches me that. Like he's a no quit kid. Um, and he
Mhm.
just puts his head down and does work. He doesn't tell you, he just does it. And that influences me. So yeah, if someone goes, well, I could never be a leader. That's not my gig. And they fear it. I'm like, hey, it's not something to be afraid of. It's, to me, it's truly something to remember. You're doing it all the time, whether you acknowledge it or not. Now, you might not be this eloquent, well-spoken, commanding, director-oriented leader, and I think that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what the environment calls for. But I've seen some really amazing leaders that the last thing they want to do is lead, and I love them for it, because they're not the ones who are leading for themselves or for the position or power or ego. They're leading because they've been called to. I mean, look at like Gideon in the Bible, right? God, are you sure you want me to lead? Like, I really don't want to lead. And he's like, okay, here's a sign. Like, God, I don't. You got another sign up your sleeve? That's like two signs would make me feel better. God's up there. Really, Gideon? Really? Okay, check it out. Like, um, yeah, I mean, it's a skill. It can be developed just like anything. It's a muscle. Are some people naturally genetically more predisposed to be bodybuilders? Yeah, sure. But can everyone get stronger? Hell yeah.
100%. I agree with that a ton. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you teach now, you specialize in leadership. What are and teaching that, where are some of the places, and I'm going to link all this in the description to allow people to reach out to you if it's something that they want to work with you one-on-one with, or maybe with their team. What are some of the ways that you can help people grow in leadership, and where can they get a hold of you at?
Yeah, so I work on kind of three different levels. Work with individual leaders, either doing executive coaching, which is where they're kind of walking me through some challenges or opportunities they have one on one. I also have a few programs I work which are specifically like self mastery, self leadership, like how to lead yourself and define your purpose and articulate your values and build habits of excellence and deconstruct habits that are kind of dragging you down. That's my self leadership program. And then I have a how to lead teams program that I walk people through one on one, which is, hey, what is leadership and how do you establish a vision and how do you figure out how you lead authentically and most effectively, because how Taylor leads is not going to be how Phil leads, and that's good and that's healthy. But sometimes I'll partner with people to define that and help them build their vision and work on their communication and teach them how to plan and execute that plan with the team and delegate and have people accountable in a healthy constructive fashion. So those are all
Mm.
targeted to the individual, the coaching and the self leadership team leadership program. I work with organic leadership teams, meaning say like, you have Taylor McLaughlin or, Taylor Industries United. And you go, hey, I want to work with my C suite executives. Phil, we want to work with you for 4 months. We want to build our culture, build our leadership. We want to learn how to build leaders in our organization. I have several different programs for that kind of on my website. And then lastly, the expedition we started with, I talked about that. Those are groups of, typically 4 to 8 leaders from different industries, different backgrounds, whether it's sports, military, business, faith, nonprofits. I like maximum diversity. Bring them together. We share best lessons. We work together against some common problems in epic environmental settings, and we all walk away better for it. And typically, we walk away with 6 new best friends or 7 new best friends. So I've
Mhm.
got one coming up at the end of May for that on the Santiam River here in Oregon. And then I have just a really awesome one coming up in Pismo Beach, California at the end of July. Yeah, it's going to be both on the ocean and in the mountains for a week. And that one's going to be intense, really, really good. So it's got a pretty extensive train up for that, but that's all about being an epic leader, who you're called to be at the highest
Mhm.
level. And I guess, yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it, but my website, stonewatertraining.com, all one word, is probably the best way. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, either my name or my company, Stonewater Training, either one of those.
Awesome. Well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your away from your army of a family to come and have a conversation with me. Pretty confident that the people who listen to this will be, yeah, inspired to go and start leading themselves to ultimately make a positive impact on some other people. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for how you're making the world a better place by pouring into and building up people, and we'll definitely be in touch. And I've got to get on I don't know if this year, but at some point in the future, would love to come on one of those outdoor expeditions with you.
Would absolutely love to have you, man. So you would not just learn a lot. I think you'd bring a lot, and that's the best part of them. So thank you, and yeah, don't apologize for taking me from my army of a family. I'm actually hiding from them here right now, so this is my safe place.
Fair enough. Well, I could keep you for another 3 hours, but I've got to get home to Kendra. So
It's a wise man. Well, hey, I appreciate you, Taylor. Thank you so much for the opportunity, brother, and I will see you around.